So I gotta ask the first dumb question here. Do I need to call you OF or can we go Olivia? Or do you want me?
Olivia's fine.
Olivia's fine. All right, because you got the.
I'm I tell everybody I'm surprised that people want to go with OF instead of just O because my friends in real life call me O.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Well, OF, like, you're doing the BR Yeager thing. I mean,
Yes.
this predated him, obviously, but it's like it looks very cool on your book cover. Oh shit,
Thank
I'm
you.
the blurred fucking. All right, here it is. We all see
There
it.
we go.
God damn it. All right. Given our time constraints, I'm going to jump into asking you some questions as I do on here.
Okay.
Uh, well, the first sentence is always some bullshit, just telling you what you know. You are the author of three books, most recently, your novel Backmask, which is what I'd like to focus on today. But first, help me remember how we came to know each other. I think we exchanged books several years ago after some brief interaction on social media, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I was listening to your interviews as you were getting
Oh,
started
okay.
with your writing career and you were doing tours. I think you were doing podcast tours for The Magician. And so I was listening to that because I was just getting started in this kind of like indie lit scene and I was trying to make new friends. I was trying to find out what the good podcasts were. And you had this really compelling pitch for The Magician. So I went out and I bought it. And it was also from amphetamine sulfate, which is a great press. I was like, this is a great excuse to buy something from them. It was an amazing book. I think it's amazing. I fucking love it. I wrote a review for it. I think I also managed to get the not a magazine, what would you call it? The photo book that comes
Yeah, I
with.
remember you
Yeah.
ordered that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's incredibly rare at this point. I don't think we only printed 100 of those. So, fuck yeah. Well, hold on. To your point, I just want to say here because I wrote this down. I've since known you to be extremely friendly and supportive of other writers, myself included. And there was a trajectory that was really nice to see from afar, meaning there are a lot of younger writers posting or putting out short stories, publishing their first novel on a tiny press, and then they kind of disappear, right? Not to say that some of that work isn't interesting or potentially interesting, but there's a lot of shit out there these days. You know what I mean? And the more I see someone kind of appear serious about their work or make an effort to become part of this alternative literature world, the more I'm intrigued or have more faith in the possibility of that person developing a unique voice. And you seem to be hitting all those check marks lately. So I see you, you're doing the readings, you're showing up, you're participating in interviews, you're doing podcasts, etc. And like not that that's the only thing that matters, but I think when this type of shit comes up, I really want to help elevate people who seem serious about this shit. And that's part of it. It other than like, we're not after money here. We're just trying to have like consume interesting ideas and put our stuff out there too. So I appreciate that about you. So now after reading Backmask, and apologies on my delay getting through the book, but after reading Backmask, it occurred to me how rare a book like this might be in the landscape of contemporary literature. It reminds me a lot of the magic of like 1990s cinema. I wrote down a few like just key phrases. Like it has this sort of slow burn to it. It seems very character driven. It's this expansive world. It reminded me abstractly of The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp,
Oh, that's
or the
good.
novel that's based on, which was like The Club du Mans by Arturo Perez Reverte, I think is how you say his name. I could be butchering that, but meaning like it's loosely or not loosely, it has all of this like occult ideas inside of it, but it doesn't really slip into the silliness of like horror tropes. And I guess I started reading the book assuming it was a horror novel. I mean, the setup, a young woman working for a record producer, and I think it's the 1960s ish.
Yes.
Gets
1962, it's supposed to be before JFK gets assassinated, when
all
there's
right.
still optimism in the 60s.
Okay. Well, so she gets roped into an attempt to use pop music as a means to like instigate population control via occult messaging, drugs, etc. It seems like it was going to turn into this supernatural thing, but it doesn't really get into ghosts or demons or any sort of typical horror trope. Instead, this seems to be a world building exercise for a kind of alternate history. And it's a lot of fun to read.
Thank you.
So, from my understanding, you based this on a real record producer, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm very unfamiliar with that era of music and pop culture. Can you sort of fill in the gaps for me in terms of like what influenced you to write this novel?
Yes, it is based on the life of Joe Meek, who was an English music producer. I asked my mom if she knew who Joe Meek was, and she said, "Oh yeah, he was the Telstar man." Like instantly, didn't need to look him up. She knew exactly who he was.
The
He
Who Man?
was
The Telstar? What is that?
the Telstar man. The Telstar was one of the first satellites that actually managed to break the Earth's atmosphere, orbit the Earth, and send messages back to home base. And he wrote a song that was inspired by the space race, essentially. And it was the first all electronic pop song to get to get on the Billboard charts. I don't remember exactly what it was. It wasn't first. It was more like fourth or fifth or 10th or something like that. It was all instrumental, and there had been like he wasn't the first electronic music producer, but he was the first one to get any kind of pop recognition.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why I chose to take this into an occult angle is because he was a very weird guy. He was a World War II vet. He probably did have PTSD. That's why that's in the book. He was a gay man. He was in England during the time when it was illegal to be gay. And he was just like not well at all. But he did have a lot of interesting ideas that he was constantly trying to explore. He was into the occult. He did genuinely believe that his dreams were telling him the future. And famously, he insisted that he predicted the day the music died, which was when a plane crashed and killed musicians. No, it killed Buddy Holly. Uh, I'm gonna butcher all of their nicknames, and we've
I
got
don't
a
fucking
time
care. I
crunch.
don't know
I'm
most.
gonna I'm gonna blaze through that. A plane crashed and killed a bunch of musicians, and people were like, "Holy shit! The pop charts are never going to be the same." This is the day the music died. And Joe Meek insisted that he predicted that day and told Buddy Holly backstage at a show, but he got the year wrong. He got the date, but the year wrong. And so September, I think it was September 2nd, came and went, and Buddy Holly said, "Whatever, this isn't real. I'm going to get on this plane on September 2nd the following year." Right.
Oh, okay.
Before I let you pick back up,
Yeah.
what I wanted to get to was he, in his interest in the occult, was very into the idea that electronics could pick up some kind of like ethereal effects. And so he was a music producer. He had a lot of access to electronic equipment, but he was also really into like experimenting with that equipment in order to pick up ghosts, essentially.
So, not that you're incredibly unusual in your interest of like a time period that you don't exist in, but sort of what is your access point to that era as something of interest, or like do you listen to a lot of music from that era? I mean, I've seen kind of interviews you talk about. I looked at something, fucking forget the artist and the song, but you were talking about this mishmash of goth and hippie stuff that was like coming out of. I don't even know if he produced this, but I listened to a song and it kind of felt like a Halloween soundtrack or something, but I didn't know what this was. So I'm just curious, like where do you intersect into this world?
So that's two questions, and I'm gonna answer them both. I
Yeah,
don't
great.
actually feel like the 60s is my interest. But it's a very nostalgic period for my mother. She was, that was like a foundational point in her growing up. And so I always felt kind of connected to the 60s, like through her. It felt like something sort of borrowed, something that was part of my childhood, something that was always present and accessible. And through that, I had my own sort of nostalgia for it, but it never felt like mine. but I was still interested in it the way that other people are. I was just looking for my own access point into it. And at some point in the pandemic, I was like trying to imagine basically like a daytime, like a daylight horror uh film. Well, yeah, I was picturing it like a film. Like, what would it be if you could make something with those really bright psychedelic colors that was still horror? The
Hmm.
good news is there's a fuck ton of stuff exactly like that. So I would just watch all of those movies. It was great. They're amazing. If you watch Belladonna of Sadness,
Oh,
oh, I
okay. I'm
actually
familiar with that actually, which
there's a
is
ton of them.
insane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dario Argento. Like, there's a ton of like brightly colored Kenneth Anger. Um, but the song, while I was doing all of this research, while I was looking for a way to kind of try to make the 60s look different, like imagine the 60s but through a lens that didn't feel oversaturated to me. I was listening to Last Podcast on the Left, which is what I brought up in the article, and I was listening to their episode about Joe Meek, and they played one of his songs. It's not the Telstar song, it's Night of the Vampire. And it's very Halloweeny. It sounds like you would put it on in a haunted house, or
Yeah.
like you would put it on in a speaker and leave it on your porch and let the kids gather candy, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, you know. But it also sounded a lot like goth music from the 90s. It sounded very much like samples that they would borrow. It sounded like something that the Cramps would absolutely fucking cover. Um, and it sounded like a lot of what those psychobilly kids would have just like ripped off wholesale. And there was this nostalgic period for the 60s in the 90s, because that's that 30-year cycle. I remember it. I don't really have much physical evidence of it, but I do remember, like, one of the reasons why, or I suspect anyways, that like the original Apple computers were so brightly colored with that specific palette, as far
Uh-huh.
as I remember, was like a nod to 1960s like home appliances.
Oh, interesting. I never made that connection, but yeah, you're probably right. Um, so were you a psychobilly goth kid? Or did you grow
Fuck
up in the
yes.
90s,
Yeah,
80s, 90s? I don't know.
90s. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not gonna, I mean, I don't know. Some people are whatever about saying their age, but you can tell me if you want. Otherwise, we'll just skip that.
I
All
will
right.
tell you it's my birthday today.
If what?
It's my birthday.
Is your birthday today?
It's my
Oh
birthday.
shit. I had no, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I'm not sorry. I mean, that's a good thing. Happy birthday. I can't believe you're hanging out with me. I should have
It's a
just been
weekday.
like, do it later, go do something fun. I mean, hopefully this is slightly fun. I'll
I
get it.
just yes, I'm
Okay.
very excited by this, but also I bookend my week with, like, something fun on the weekends.
Good. I would do the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't do much during the weeknights except for shit like this. But okay, so I have some more questions for you.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the protagonist, Valerie Chill,
Mhm.
maybe as an access point to you.
Okay.
I mean, this is not autofiction, but we're in that generation of literature, art, where everyone is just making shit about themselves, right? And I am the kind of epitome of that. But you have given your novel a central character, this young woman who's kind of a masked lesbian, well read, I assume, into some of the music we're exposed to in the book. Is this an extension of you, or am I reading into this in the wrong way? I mean,
It's I mean, I in so much that every character is always going to be you. I didn't intend for her to be me. I have another masked lesbian in my first book, and she's a big girl. And I feel like typically when you do see masked lesbians in fiction, they're big, either because the author thinks they're sexy, or because the author thinks that that's disgusting and wants to really hone in on how disgusting that is, that there's a big woman.
okay.
Um,
But that's
and
not the
I
vibe of
just
this at all. Like she seems like a, I mean, I don't know, in my imagination, like she seems relatively attractive in like a conventional way. Like she's got women hitting on her and men, right?
Yes. I
Yeah.
mean, that
Okay.
just seems to be par for the course as being a woman. Uh, anyways, um, but so the entry point that I was going into with Valerie was that I wanted to make a very small masked lesbian.
Hmm.
And I decided that I didn't want her to have a Napoleonic complex. I wanted her to be very confident. I decided that I hadn't made anybody who was super full of themselves. Like I hadn't written a character who was like really full of themselves yet. And so I decided to make somebody who was very coiffed, who was a little vain, and who, as a result of being sort of self-centered and not caring what other people think, could be a little spacey.
Okay. All right. And then, I mean, there seems to be like so are you from New York originally?
Yeah.
You live there right now, right?
Yeah, I was born here.
You were born there. Okay. So, a lot of the scenery, more or less, that we're exposed to in this book, I mean, I'm abstractly thinking of New York and New York not in my time period, but I don't know what the fuck you're talking about really. So I just have to kind of imagine this stuff, which is true in most books. But there is like the typical like a younger person who's working for like a piece of shit and but there's like a mild admiration or like rapport between Valerie and the record producer, and she sells him drugs and so forth. And I don't know. I mean, this seems not atypical of like what could happen even today. I guess it's someone living in any urban center, right? You work for your boss, you sell him something on the side, he treats you like garbage, but it's also like a mild sweetness between you.
Yeah.
This a little lived in, perhaps.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've experienced. I get most of my employment is just like through small business owners, um, mostly through retail. I never get much administrative experience, but like, yeah, the small business owners, you're their child, you're their parent, you're their employee.
Fair enough. Well, okay, so we don't need to like get you fired here, so I'll shut the fuck up. Your book has many references to the occult, and it's written in such a way that I assume you have some greater understanding about all this, more so than I do, anyway. I mean, I wrote a novel that could be labeled an occult noir, but a lot of how I went about this was cloaking my character in stupidity because I read some Crowley or a medieval text having to do with black magic. And it was either bewildering or boring to me, often both. So I just translated my inability to understand this stuff. Um, I wrote here, I'm kind of an idiot. Maybe that's,
That's a
but
little.
I'm, I'm
Let's be proud of ourselves. All right, let's not
all right.
talk down to ourselves. I'm sorry. I've been
Thank you.
I've been getting into a habit of doing this with all of my friends. Go on.
That's very nice. Well, I'm just curious about your interest or access point to occult material. Where does this come from? You
I
like,
mean, you asked, I was a witchy kid when I was a kid, but I think this is a different. I think this is a different access point. Um, I mean, I've been wondering for a very long time, like exactly where like the collection of beliefs and imagery in New Age comes from. And so I've been like looking, I've just been like, for years now trying to figure out exactly where that comes from. And I feel like I finally have a pretty good access point to that now that I've like done a significant amount of research um into the decadent period actually, which I didn't expect to find it there. But um the French decadent period of
okay.
literature in the 1890s. I'm sorry. I'm just, so comfortable with that time period. I'll just throw out terms. It's fine. Um, where was I?
So you're
So
talking the decadent period. You did a lot of research into the decadent period. So we're talking France in the 1890s.
France in the 1890s.
Okay.
So, well, I mean, I could actually go back a little bit further. So, what we're looking at is post Enlightenment. We're looking at the Industrial Revolution. We're looking at people who are gradually coming to accept that man is not the center of the universe, the earth is not the center of the galaxy, the sun is in the center of our solar system, the galaxy is at a size that we can't actually imagine, man descends from ape, and if you go above the clouds, God is not there smiling and waiting to cup you in his palms, so religion had this huge overhaul where they were trying to figure out, like, genuinely, the Catholic Church was trying to figure out how to continue to preach with this knowledge. and you had a group of people who were like, fuck it, we ball, none of that shit is real, the devil planted dinosaur bones. And then you have this other group of people who were looking at other like philosophers, you were looking at people who were looking at scientists, like Kant had just written um, his book, which I can't fucking
It's
remember.
okay. Uh-huh.
And there, like, the German Enlightenment period was also looking to grapple with this. So there was like this, the German Enlightenment period was a couple of years after the French Enlightenment, a couple of decades after the French Enlightenment, and we're looking to grapple with like a lot of the existential dread that people were experiencing now that God was dead. Um, and so this is basically where Crowley extracted a lot of his love under will under way. Like, will is the will that Immanuel Kant was bringing up. Um, the idea, like, they were reading other religions' texts, which were being translated into European languages for the first time. So the Buddhist texts were finally being translated into German, slowly into French, slowly into English. People were reading that. People were reading, like, the Egyptian hieroglyphs were translated for the first time in history in the 1860s. People had been assuming that the images that were written on those pyramids were just like magical talismans for centuries. And finally, they could read them and see what they said. And so suddenly, people had like this access to a huge wealth of other ways of looking at the world and man's place in the world and man's place in the universe that didn't, that really jarred the Christian view of Christ being the only true path. And so people were saying, how do we address that on top of everything else? And there were people who said, you know what, fuck it, we ball. All paths are good.
Uh-huh.
All paths are good. We study everything and we figure out something to do. And that's basically where you get the ceremonial magicians from. Crowley ripped off wholesale the generation that came before him. I've got this book. Hold on. Which is about Josephine Peladon,
Shit. Okay. Okay.
who is basically
We're
French
getting.
Crowley. I'm
You gotta tell me
sorry.
the day. Yeah, we both have that blur problem because I don't want to share my
Sorry.
embarrassing background. It's okay. What is the title?
Um, Son of Prometheus, The Life and Work of Josephine Peladon. And it is Dr. Sasha Chaitau's doctoral thesis. It's great.
It's great.
Um,
Okay.
and yeah, people decided if these gods weren't real, then it didn't matter if they were playing around in their space. If they were real, then all the better to keep thinking about them and to use the tools that were used in prior centuries, in prior generations, to try to grapple with existential dread.
That's fair. That's very okay. Well, has this ever been explained so succinctly to me? Perhaps not. I guess I have like inklings of that knowledge, but thank you very much. So, like, did you have an interest in this prior to writing the book, or did this book sort of drive your research to discover more literally what you just told me?
Yes and no to both of those things.
All right, that's
Again, like this, the original concept of this was like, how could I make something brightly colored and still scary? The second thing that I was trying to set out to do was like, what if the satanic panic started like 30 years earlier? And there seems to be like a lot of evidence that that was true. You know, people were really terrified of what the changes of the 60s meant. There were a lot of like devil panic films coming out in the early 60s. Um, and while I was like looking for material to write that, I was also like doing my own reading out of curiosity, finding what I could find. You know, I didn't find Son of Prometheus because I was looking for material on Backmask. um yeah, and I was also like, one day I was like, I want to read Immanuel Kant. I did not, but I tried my fucking hardest at that at that book.
I have the same thought process. It's like one of those things that's probably just going to be off in the distance. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll get around to it. We all get old and maybe we'll have more time, but at the moment, I feel like that's not true. Well, so you've sort of answered this question already, but I think I can sort of get into another discussion. What I wrote here is, what is the genre or genres you find yourself working in? Your short story collection that I believe came out prior to Backmask treads a lot of territory that I would say is more typical of contemporary literature. Sort of poetic minimalist approach to emotional or sexual material, pulled more or less directly from our lives. But then you veer into these fantastical pieces that seem to have nothing to do with autofiction, memoir, Instagram poetry about the internet, or any of the other kind of trending styles of the past decade. I've seen you write, I mean, I think it's just on your Twitter X profile that you're kind of, what did you say there? Something about being a pulp novelist.
Isn't that the simplest thing to say?
Yeah, and yet I find that actually incredibly interesting right now because I don't talk. I mean, it's not like I'm speaking to the whole of contemporary literature, but in the world that I exist in, and that you and I are probably at least doing this, orbiting planets of writers in this thing, I just don't see a lot of people doing what you're doing right now. And and maybe that's just like, throwing back to stuff becomes interesting when it's no longer like the status quo. But I don't know, just the simple fact that you're sort of like building a traditional novel. It's not like this experimental literature where I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like it's very instantly gratifying. And I don't know. But so do you, I mean, you talked about this sort of daylight horror. I like that concept. I like the idea of thinking about this in colors because that makes a lot of sense when I read this book. It's not like this dark, grimy thing. It's very entrenched in like pop music of the 60s, but with Freemasonry and the occult and stuff like that, which is, I don't know. It seems, I mean, I don't know much about the 60s, but otherwise it seems right up my alley. Do you want to talk about genre and what you're doing, or like how do you see yourself in this sort of alt lit world?
Sure. I mean, I am going to do what I do and I'm going to write what I want to write. And people can come along for the ride if they want. And I would love to find friends. I mean, I do. I have a bunch of people who are doing very similar stuff to what I'm doing, people who have very similar inspirations or at least like starting points. So, like, I've heard in a couple of interviews that you've given that, like, you had access to, like, um, is it Peter Best?
Oh, Philip Best at
Philip Best. Philip
Consulting.
Best, you had
Yeah.
access to Dennis Cooper, like when you were a teenager. I didn't. I think the closest I ever got to that world was Poppy Z Bright, and it just
Okay.
didn't click. Like I tried, I picked it up. I can't even say that I was like, oh, disgusting gore, but I was just like, it didn't work, and I moved on. But the stuff that I was really interested in, the stuff that I did connect with, was the underground comic scene that was happening around that time. And it was kind of in parallel to it. So I was reading a lot of slave labor graphics. I was reading a lot of web comics.
So hold on a
And
second. I just gotta stop because
yeah,
I don't know what that slave labor graphics is. Can you just
slave.
yeah to tell
I'm
me what the
actually
fuck?
surprised.
Yeah, I know a lot about what I'm a part of, but outside of that, I guess not.
I mean, I guess the simplest way that I could describe slave labor graphics was that it was goth comics essentially,
Okay.
and they printed Jonan Vasquez, who went on to do Invader Zim, but his first thing was Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. I don't know if
I'm
you're
aware of that too. I have goth friends, but
yeah,
I didn't read it, but I knew the T-shirt. I knew the. Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they did a bunch of other stuff that was like in a very similar vein where it was very cartoony and very violent, perfect for a 13-year-old girl.
Sure.
And you know, other stuff like that in a similar vein, like manga was just getting translated. I was reading a fuck ton of manga. Like I remember back in the days when the manga aisle was a single bookshelf. Uh, and most of it was battle royale. But
Okay.
I was this was where I learned roughly how to structure a story. And this, I think, is one of the reasons why I have like so much character driven stories, because like I was drawn mostly towards character designs in comic books that I was reading and animated stuff that I was watching. And so characters were the selling point. And I see that still online in a lot of the spaces that are adjacent to those as well. But I mean, I still like I did try when I was very young to draw comics, and I was like, oh, this is not for me. So I stuck to books. I like books. It's not like I don't read things that don't have pictures in them. Um, and I have been trying to expand. I've been trying to read more, and I was trying to, you know, experiment with styles, especially for the short stories, especially because like that method seemed like the right way to write short stories because it seems like the natural way that I write tends towards 300-page books. And so I needed to do something to adjust.
No, I mean it's good, and but they're like it's not boring, and it was. I mean, I'm really happy to start seeing you gain some traction. Like I saw like Elle Nash basically put this as whatever that book of the month thing that she does, which is congratulations.
Thank you. It was very kind of
But
her.
when you say you see other people sort of adjacent to you doing something similar, who? I'm very curious because like I am not seeing. I mean, I've seen a lot of horror novels come out that are like narrative based, character based. And while I'm very interested in the genre abstractly, I fucking hate like 90% of it. I think it's so goddamn cheesy. And so there's almost a resistance on my part when someone first hands me like a contemporary horror novel. I'm like, you're most likely like a cheesy motherfucker. So it's like, and yet I'm doing it, so it's hard to but I just want to say to everyone who watches this, I really don't feel like that's what you're doing here. And it's not even explicitly horror. I mean, daylight horror maybe sounds like a good thing, but I don't know. It's just like a good novel. So anyway, stepping back, who do you see that you're into that's kind of our generation doing something along the same lines? Do you have, I don't know, another name?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, great.
I feel like it would be a little too much to say that I feel like there is some connection between like what B.R. Yeager and Charlie Nelsby are doing. But David Simmons definitely, Justin Lutz, Sam Richards at Weird Punk, most of what Weird Punk does, I would say, is it Evan Dean Shelton, who published Lockdown Laureate, like he gets it. He knows exactly what
Okay.
I'm doing, and he writes very similar stuff.
Okay.
Um, his partner, Edwin Callahan, does very similar stuff. Matthew Mitchell wrote Chain Devils, which you should definitely read. It's fucking great. I think of it mostly as like aesthetically driven novels. Like you start like, we have a group chat where we're like, oh man, dude, imagine if there was like a fucking ghost that plays baseball, and we're like, that sounds stupid, and they're like, yes, but imagine. And we just go off on that tangent to see what can be done.
Okay.
It's a lot of like, I also imagine it very much as like inspired by music and music visuals, because it seems like that's a really rich like lexicon of images to draw from.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. That seems very much where this is coming from. God, can I
Nope.
not? Oh, look at that. Is that
Oh, wait.
word Backmask? All
God damn it. All right, never mind.
right, well, we got about like 6 minutes left. I think that was all the questions. I didn't want to overdo it. But I mean, first of all, I mean everyone should buy this book. I think it's very good. I'm very behind on that, but this is how books take a minute to get like
Yeah,
into the world. I think it takes a
yeah,
few years, so I'm not that. I don't feel that bad.
it's fine.
Are you working on? I assume you're working on something else. Yeah.
I'm working on Death Cleric, which is very much directly inspired by all of that research that I just told you about. And
Cool.
basically, like, what if you did a French decadence novel as a fantasy? And I feel like that would like undo all of the fantasy tropes, even though fantasy is directly inspired by those books. Um, Almost done. First couple of chapters are on my Substack, so feel free. To read it or plug it, I guess. I don't know.
I'll plug it. I'm sorry. I don't read on a screen. I
I
can't.
understand that
It's just
entirely. Yeah,
so wait, is this something that's lined up to be published in its full thing, or are you still looking around for somebody to put it out or
I'm
what?
still looking around for
Yeah,
somebody.
but that's fine. I mean, I've never had something that wasn't finished and pitched it to like especially like a small press, right? Have you?
Hmm? No,
Oh,
I would much rather have it done and like edited a couple of rounds.
yeah, that seems smart. But also, I think I mean this came out last year, is that true?
1
2023.
year ago. Yep.
Yeah, I almost feel like, um, I mean, I'm almost embarrassed that I have two things coming out this year. I mean, one of them is a reissue, but I sort of feel like you shouldn't publish every year because I think like a book. I mean, God, there's so many books out. I can't keep up with everyone already, but
Right.
if you
That's
have a
very
little
true.
traction, it's like make it an event. If you put it out every year, either people need to be like a hardcore fan of you, or else it's just like, all right, well, that person's dropping another book. It's probably not that good because they only spent less than a year on it.
That's a fair point.
I mean, some people have different ways of working. I'm very slow also at writing, and I don't know what your process is. What is your process? You do this
Right
every
whenever
day, or you just like I have 3 months, I write 18 hours.
I work full time, I can't do that. It's right whenever I can, on the bus if I have to.
Fuck yeah, I love that. All right. What else do you want to say for the next 3 minutes?
Oh, that's too much pressure.
Okay.
You take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on here with me. I mean, I don't know. This has been something I wanted to do for a while, and I feel like I like want to hang out with you at some point. I think I'm
Yeah.
supposed.
When are you coming to New York?
Well, I don't know the date yet, but I actually am planning to. I think it either the very end of October or sometime in November. I'm working with Lydia. Do you know who does Vera PR? I don't know. She's helping me
Oh,
with like
right.
some shit for this reissue, and part of that I think is an event in New York,
Okay.
and it's about as much as I can afford, like one trip, So
Sure.
I'm probably only gonna be there for like a weekend, maybe like a day after. But yeah, if
Okay.
you're around and it makes sense for both our schedules, I'd love to finally see you in person.
Yeah, definitely. Let me
All right,
know what you have time for, and I'll try to find something cool for you to do.
all right, cool. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Anyway, anyone who's watching this, buy Backmask, buy, oh God, don't hate me.
Lockdown laureate.
Lockdown Laureate. Okay. That was actually really interesting too. And I barreled through that one first. And then obviously took way too long to read this, but you know what?
I
Still
I
great.
appreciate it. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks again, Chris.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day and happy birthday. Fuck.
Thank you.
What are you doing? Do you have plans? Like maybe not tonight, but this weekend?
Well, unfortunately, well, so I'm going to see Special Interest, which is a great band. I highly recommend them if you haven't heard them.
What kind of
Most
shit?
of the weekend, this is going to be the parent weekend, unfortunately. Last weekend was the friend weekend.
No, I get that. My
Yeah.
birthday this year, I'm going to visit my mom and grandparents, so it's okay. I don't live with them. It's just the way it happens. All right. Well, we'll end it there. Great night.
Yeah, good night. Thanks
All
again.
right. See you. Bye bye.